Hello Artcadets, welcome to this week's quick tips video where today I'm going to give you some quick do's and don'ts for drawing realistic clothing, because when we're learning something new it can be as helpful to look at what not to do as it is to look at what you should do. Sometimes it's easy to see what you've drawn isn't quite right, but it's harder to see exactly why, which can be really frustrating, so I'm hoping these tips today might ease some of that frustration. So today I'm going to use this reference picture that I've printed out, but if you want to practice at home you can use pictures from catalogues, magazines or newspapers. And for this video I will be using the items that I'm putting up here, and I will also list these in the description box as well if you want to go and check that out. But I'm using coloured pencil, although you can use whatever materials you have at home. I'm also using a blending stamp, but again, if you haven't got one of these, then you can make do with either tissue, cotton wool or cotton buds. So I've set up my paper so that all the things that you shouldn't do or things that you don't do on the left, and the do things, the things that you should aim to do on the right. So to start with, we need to look at the basic shapes on our reference picture and create an outline sketch, and this is where people can make their first mistake, by drawing their sketch lines in too hard. So hard sketch lines may show through on your finished drawing and prevent it from looking realistic. Instead, try and hold your pencil further away from the point, so applying lighter pressure. Or even use an H pencil, which will be lighter anyway, and that will make sure you don't go too dark. But remember, you can always lift some of these darker lines with a kneaded eraser or blue tack if you need to before adding any colour. Once we've done that, we're going to start shading, and we need to mark out the darkest areas on our drawing first, and this is where people make their second mistake by using solid lines. And they might also use a blunt pencil, so they're really obvious. So clothing normally wraps around the body and only forms hard lines when it is creased or folded. So check back with your reference picture. Is there a hard solid line or edge? If not, don't draw one in. What you should do instead is to use small circular motions with a sharp pencil. And again, I'm holding my pencil further away from the point. It's also important to overlap areas so that you make sure the whole of the white of the paper is filled in. So you're aiming for smooth transitions between the darkest areas and the lightest areas, and although this might take a bit longer, the end result will be much more realistic. So straight away you can see it's looking far more realistic and far much more like fabric or material. And without even knowing what we're drawing, we might even be able to guess what it is, whereas on the left hand side it could be anything. So it's worth taking that extra time just to get that realistic and effective look. So another common mistake people make is they don't shade evenly or add enough contrast. So it may be quicker to use fast zigzag lines in all directions to fill in colour, but this will leave gaps where the white of the paper will show through and make blending these out later a lot more difficult. So not adding enough contrast or range of values from lightest to darkest will also mean your finished picture can look a bit flat. And it's also easy to lose sight of where your lightest areas are meant to be, and you end up with just a general blue all over. So compare this to our drawing where we've added a lot more contrast with careful shading, and you can see the difference in the end result. The darks are darker and the lights are lighter, which makes our picture of our material look far more realistic. So the next step is blending. So you may think this is the easy bit, and it can be tempting to rush as you're nearly at the end, but another common mistake people make is scrubbing with their blender. So they use it really harshly, pressing down hard on the paper, ruining the tooth of the paper, and use zigzag lines in all directions, which can make really smudgy lines visible on your picture, which is not good if you're trying to draw smooth fabric. So if you've added your shading carefully in the previous step with small circular motions, you won't need to press down too hard on your blender. So on the do side, we just need to use small circular motions, and you have a lot more control and you can achieve a much nicer finish. You're also less likely to work over the lighter areas that you worked hard to leave light, and it just ends up looking far more realistic. So don't scrub too hard with your blender, use the side, use circular motions, and you have a lot more control. So the next step is to lift out any highlights, and the biggest mistake people make here is to assume that all the light areas need to be pure white. So they might go erasing large areas again with harsh lines. And it's important to keep checking that reference picture, because often you'll see that the lightest areas aren't pure white, they're just bright or of a lighter tone. So light highlights can look more effective than white highlights. So I'm just picking out tiny individual areas here, and then even going back in with my blender to smooth those areas out, because they're still bright and light and they tend to look more realistic and more like fabric than what we've done on the don't side. So the last step, and yes, this is the last step, is to add any texture or pattern to your clothing. And this will depend on what type of material you're drawing, so whether it be wool, denim, silk, lace. But the biggest mistake people make here is to think that they have to add this as a first step. So you can get really bogged down right at the beginning with patterns, with textures, and end up giving up before you've even got anywhere. So make sure that this is the last step. It's a lot easier to add pattern and texture once you've got the wrinkles in the fabric, and once you know the darkest areas and the lightest areas, and where that pattern will go as it moves up and over and in the creases, than if you add it right at the beginning. So keep this step to the end. And use a sharp pencil and add those details in carefully, looking at your reference picture. So that's it, folks. That's my quick tips for drawing clothing. I hope you found it helpful, and we are going to put that into use on Friday's video. So tune in then, like, comment and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you on Friday. Bye!